بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه وبارك وسلم تسليما كثيرا إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. What he had discussed in the introduction, following the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, fulfilling the rights of the Quran and what the rights of the Quran were, and how that is something that will take a person out of the darkness into yaqeen. That's what we were discussing in the beginning. So he says, وَإِنَّمَا يُمَيِّزْ ذَلِكَ وَيَرْغَبُ فِيهِ أَهْلُ الْعَقْلِ عَنِ اللَّهِ. The people who have been given a specific divinely endowed intellect are the person who's going to be able to make this distinction. And then we, if you remember, we discussed how various different deviances come to be, how different people go astray, how they move away from the mainstream and the spirit of the Sharia, generally because of magnifying a certain point, exaggerating a certain point, which is a very important discussion to have, because when you start looking at various different groups and you see extreme in any of them, then you'll realize that this is a problem. If you see takfir coming off too easily from any group, then you know that there's a problem, because the way of the Prophet ﷺ was not to do takfir. The way of the Prophet ﷺ was to give as many chances and excuses as possible. Somebody as clearly known as Abdullah ibn Ubay, the munafiq, was clearly known to be a munafiq, everybody knew. And he did things which were reported back to the Prophet ﷺ. And it was offered to him that we'll take care of him, we'll finish him off. But the Prophet ﷺ said, no, I don't want it to be known that Muhammad kills his followers, people who profess to follow him. So if that was the ihtiyat and the precaution that the Prophet ﷺ used, then how can killing just be so easy? How can murder be so insignificant? How can takfir be so easy to do as part of that same faith? So that's why you see there's always going. And the other thing that you have to realize is that whenever any type of ideology comes about that is of an extreme nature, you're always going to get an opposing ideology which will eventually end up exaggerating in the opposite direction. For example, you've got people who wanted to give absolutely no room for human, or they basically gave the entire ability to create things within the human power itself, for human free will, absolute human free will. So now the path is actually in the middle, in the sense that Allah has given us free will, but we don't have absolute power to do whatever we wish. So it's kind of in between. It's a very complicated area to locate. And this is actually what the Prophet ﷺ himself had said when the Sahaba started discussing this in a very animate manner. He said that if you go into this too deeply, you'll either come out as a absolute proponent of free will, where everything is in the hands of the human being and Allah doesn't even come into the picture, or you will come to be absolute rejectors of free will, where you will feel like the human being is just like a leaf in the wind with absolutely no right to decide at all. So then the other one is the Khawarij. They went overboard in their application of certain verses and said that even some of the Sahaba had done kufr because of, in their view, not going according to the command of Allah. So they said, وَمَنْ لَمْ يَحْكُمْ بِمَا أَنزَلَ اللَّهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْكَافِرُونَ. Those people who don't judge and legislate and rule according to what Allah has revealed, then they're kafir. But it was in their understanding that these people had gone against the Quran, in their own understanding, not in the understanding of the people who are doing the act. So there's always going to be subjective in that sense as well. That's another added layer of problem, that it's always going to be subjective as well. Yes, we also agree, the Sahaba agree, that anybody who does rule against that, then they're kafirs. That's understandable, because you are giving another complete kufri system that is opposed to the Quran. You're giving that the right to be the rightful upper hand, right, in that sense. So that's understandable. But in reality, if that's not the case, but in your opinion you think that they have done that, and your opinion is wrong, but that's all, it's subjective in that sense. So how do we bring the whole democracy issue in here then? Well, democracy is not entirely anti-Islamic. We have to understand that. And one of the wisdoms in why the Prophet ﷺ did not name the next Khalifa, despite the fact that all the signs were there. The indications had been given. Aballah wal mu'minun, like Allah and the believers have rejected that anybody else lead the prayer. When he saw Abu Bakr leading the prayer and everybody calmly praying behind him, one of the statements made by the Prophet ﷺ was that Allah and the believers have rejected that anybody else lead their prayer, while the Prophet ﷺ was sick in those last few days. And a woman came and said, Ya Rasulullah, if I come back and I don't see you around, I don't find you, whether that means you're gone out for on a travel, or whether you have passed away, whatever that means, right? Who shall I go to? Abu Bakr. So there's so many indications, multiple indications, but he never said he's the next Khalif, like clearly, right? And obviously you think the Prophet ﷺ didn't know what was going to happen? You didn't think he didn't have that foresight? But this was all part of explaining how it's supposed to be. And the Khulafa understand this. So Abu Bakr radiallahu anh then did understand that the next one had to be Umar, and he clearly stated that and designated him. But then Umar radiallahu anhu, he didn't do that. Right? He didn't do that. He made a committee of 6 people, the 6 of the best. And he said, one of them has to be chosen among you. So you see how the different choices were made at that time. So it shows that there's no one particular way of doing it. It shows you there's room here, as long as it doesn't go against, as long as it doesn't go against certain other rules of the Sharia, like dhulm, oppression. It's not a wiratha, right? It's not hereditary. Number of things like this, of this nature. So we have these general principles, and you have to work within that. So there's scope there, as long as it's based on concepts of justice, social welfare, and these kind of things. So what you had is, you had these Khawarij who went to one extreme, and part of their extreme was also then to say that, you see, once you have an extreme, is it that clearly, is it like that the extreme mentality comes first, and based on that you make these kind of subjective judgments? Or is it because you make certain judgments that now you actually go down that road, and everything else you also become? Personally, I would say that it comes from that kind of mentality. You are predisposed to that kind of shiddah, right? Extremism from before, right? And thus, whenever you see such an opinion being proposed, that appeals to you. And I'm telling you this from personal experience, because if you're a person if you're a person who likes to be different, radical, then seeing a radical view, that gives you food. Obviously you don't do it you don't realize you're doing it for selfish reasons, but that's how the human complexity is. That's the human that is basically where the whole we're not robots. We're not 1 + 1 is 2 all the time. Unfortunately, there's a lot of confusion in between. There's a lot of other factors that make up the human being. So I don't know I'm being extreme. Do you understand? I don't know that I'm being extreme, but I am extreme. But who's going to judge me and tell me that I'm extreme? Do you understand? So if I'm extreme, then I'm going to look for radical opinions. And that's why, because you get different types of people, any opinion that is proposed will have somebody to pick them up, will get a following, right? Whether that be minority or majority. One has to understand for themselves. And the problem is that, when you're starting off, some people will never realize that they've got an extreme ideology. They've got extreme approach to things. Some people will realize it if they find somebody to tell them, if it's pointed out to them enough, and they're looking for change. If they're not looking for change, then people may tell them, but they will think they are right. themselves they are right, and they will never listen to anybody. That's why some people will basically become old and still remain the extreme, still holders of that extreme ideology until the end. But people on the path should realize this, because people on the path, right, what they're doing is they're opening themselves up for correction. You know, that's the whole point of the path. You're not going to get better overnight, but you have to just make yourself open and take things in. Because you see, you may give a a person may hear a lecture about this on Friday, but because they're not on the path looking to change, they're just doing a routine of listening to the Jumu'ah, right? The impact may not come as fast as for somebody who is going out of his way, doing some dhikr as well to soften the heart, allowing themselves exposure to the words of the mashayikh and the awliya of the past, to help them to remold themselves, adjust themselves. That's basically what this path is all about. That's the way I see it. It's a path to expose yourself to the praiseworthy traits as lived by the mashayikh, as lived by the predecessors, as lived by these great people, and to reflect over that and hopefully change like that, slowly. That's, I find this a path of reflection and adjustment to refine ourselves of our character. It's not going to happen overnight, but it happens gradually. As long as you open your mind and heart to let these things in, and you're constantly reflecting. I give you an example about myself. I liked radical ideas, right? So dua after prayer was the norm. Nobody ever challenged that. Nobody ever thought otherwise. In fact, if somebody, you guys have, many of you have come at a time when it's quite flexible, right? Especially in London, other places, where people have understood that it's not part of the salat that you must do a dua collectively with the imam. And but in my time, I'm acting very old here, right? But I'm sure Maulana Dawood realizes, if you got up after salat without doing dua, people would look at you as though it was all part of the congregation, and the imam's connection to the muqtadis did not end when he made salam. Do you understand? Because it crept in somewhere, and it must have come in because people must have some of the scholars of the past must have thought that people are not doing dua, they don't know what du'as to make, and thus they start doing these loud things so that people can learn from them. Then they become an obligation. So if you go to Cape Town today, between every 2 rakats of Taraweeh, they do loud dhikr, or they do a Durood Sharif aloud. Everybody just does it aloud. Now imagine doing that here. So it wasn't done in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but they've done it obviously because they think everybody, instead of just wasting their time, they should be reading something. Do you understand? So that's how it comes in. Now if somebody says we shouldn't do that, there's going to be an uproar. There's going to be an uproar against it. So anyway, in our tradition we had dua after salat. So now Mufti Rashid Ludhianwi rahmatullahi alayhi, he came up with this entire research saying that it's not established. And I had some connection because my uncle is a direct student of his and so on and so forth. So I was, mashallah, and sounding radical and whatever the case, whatever the reason I did it for, right? I liked research. I liked, I liked points that were really clarified. And for me that just made a lot of sense. But a lot of other people read it as well. But for them it was like, no, we can't go against the norm. We're going to be upsetting the boat. That's probably what they thought. I heard it as well. They heard it as well. Obviously, it was because of my approach to things and my natural propensity to like radical things and different things that I adopted that more faster and implemented it than other people. So I was probably the only one in the entire Darulum that had this opinion and would be very vocal about it. To levels of being overboard sometimes. So once I was leading the namaz, it was Asr prayer. And what I did was I raised my own hands, I did my own dua, and I finished it without saying anything aloud. Now, the tradition in those days was that our principal Hazrat Maulana Yusuf Sahab, the way it was is that when the dua finished, when bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin, then he would get up, and as soon as he got up, then he would start leaving, people would move away, he would leave, and then everybody would leave. But the signal was that the dua finished. Now I finished off and nobody's moving. Well, obviously nobody's moving because nobody's heard anything. Hazrat Maulana Yusuf Sahab hasn't heard anything. Do you understand? So then I said bi rahmatika ya arhamar rahimin to give that signal. Do you understand? Then I go to America, and I am told off by a Palestinian brother that he doesn't make dua after Jumu'ah for the people. He doesn't make, it's this is what's happening in Palestine, this, that and the other. He exaggerated a bit. He said that when the Gujarat massacres happened, I cried on the mimbar, which I didn't, right? Unfortunately, I didn't, right? But that's what he said. He went a bit overboard. He apologized afterwards. But it's then when I realized that I am missing an opportunity, that everybody's there for Jumu'ah. It's the time when the biggest congregation. And yes, and a lot of people are walking away, as they used to do, because there's no tradition of doing dua after Salat. So they're walking away. So let me start doing dua. So I started since then. Now I do it sometimes and I don't do it sometimes aloud. Do you understand? Because that's what it is. If you want to do it for a particular reason, you can, but it's not established that the Prophet ﷺ did it loud. So I was just trying to tell you that how we approach certain things. Insan yamiru ila jinsihi, right? Which means that the human will generally incline towards their own type. So when you find other kind of extreme types, then you will link up with them. So they wonder how ISIS is able to do what it does. There's a lot of extreme people out there. People just a bit crazy, bichara, right? As you've seen with some of these guys. Now, they find in ISIS a release of their passion, and thus they just follow it. They've never seen these guys, they've just seen them online or whatever, they've heard about their ideals, and they've got a bit of grudge themselves, so they think that it's the same kind of thing. Sort of mentality, a lot of it is to do with that. That's why I say that it's only in the path that you're not just only in the path, but it's only when you are open to reflection, real reflection, that you will then otherwise make a positive change. Otherwise, you'll just go with wherever it is. So it's very important to understand these points of how these things work. A lot of it is subjective, I believe. A lot of it is subjective. But the path opens up the person. That's why he's saying that the people who have been given ahlul aqli min Allah, the right intelligence from Allah, the right intelligence from Allah, the divine insight, alladhi amilu fi ihkam al-zahir. Now, who are these people? These are people who are who work to make firm the zahir, the outside. These aren't people who are, again, this is just showing you that he says two things. He says those people who work to make firm their external aspects, وَتَنَزَّهُ عَنِ الشُّبَهِ, and they abstain from doubtful matters. Abstaining from doubtful matters is both relates to external aspects, because there are external aspects of doubt and obviously internal aspects of doubt. And more conclusively, if it's saying aspects of doubt you must avoid, then what does it mean more conclusively that you must also avoid what? The haram itself. If you're supposed to avoid doubt, then why shouldn't you avoid the haram? I mean, it's just a more baligh way of saying it. If you have to avoid this, then you have to avoid it. It goes without we're not complete, absolute literalists that, we're going to say that only avoid the doubtful matters, but if it's haram, it's alright to do it. Obviously. That's what he's saying. And then he clarifies that and he says, because Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, al-halalu bayyin, wal-haramu bayyin. Halal is clear, haram is clear. وَبَيْنَ ذَلِكَ أُمُورٌ مُشْتَبِهَاتٌ, but between them are doubtful matters. Between them are doubtful matters. This is where most people fail, in those doubtful matters. They start there. Now Imam Ghazali says something very interesting. Again, Imam Ghazali is warning people here again not to go to an extreme, because you have certain people who believe that everything is haram. They find doubts in everything. The This is the same kind of mentality as somebody who breaks up with everybody because they see the evil in everybody. They see a defect in everybody, and they think that it's necessary for them because they've seen one or two stories of the Sahaba or somebody shunning somebody because of some wrong. They think they must do the same thing. No, you have certain Sahaba who shun their own children because they said something and never spoke to him until the rest of his life. You get some of these, right? Now, their context, whatever that context was and where they did it. But people take that and think that it's justified for them to do that. The Prophet ﷺ warned against this. See, the Prophet warned against even this extremism. He said that the one who thinks that everybody is fasid and everybody is destroyed is going to be the most destroyed of them all. That's what the Prophet ﷺ said. Why is he saying that? He doesn't want us to have an opinion that all is gone, everybody is messed up and corrupt. Look at the insight of the Prophet ﷺ, because this is human problem. This is a psychological problem. This is the way humans are predisposed to do these kind of things sometimes, unless you open up your heart to be otherwise. Why are there people in certain families who've stopped talking to everybody else? They won't go to a wedding, they won't go to a walima, they won't go to they just about go to a death if you're lucky. That one is, that does kill the nafs a bit, the death one. But that's what it is, because they feel everybody is corrupt and they're the most corrupt of them all. So Imam Ghazali gives an example here. He says that the jahil thinks that the halal is absent. You don't find anything halal, and the path to it is closed as well. That's how bad the world has become. These are the Armageddon kind of ideologies that are out there, that it's all finished now. You see, the Deen cannot be just khawf. It's between raja and khawf, hope and fear. You can't have complete fear. That's, these people who think that this is just doomsday conspiracies, that everything's finished, right? They basically got the fear just mounted on them. There's no hope in it left anymore. A mu'min has to be hopeful. Iman is a deen of hope. The Prophet ﷺ always gave great hope. Very important to give that hope. And that's why we have miracles. That's why we have things where we've seen things on one extreme and it changes to the other extreme. So he says that until such people start thinking that the only thing which is left that is pure is the water of the Furat, of the Euphrates, and the hashish and nabitu fil mawat, and the wild grass that is growing in the jungles, right, in the desolate areas. That's the only thing which is halal now. Everything else is corrupted, everything is polluted, because there's some oppression taking place, because there's some cheating going on, because there's some deception taking place, whatever the case is. Or because of that, it taints and pollutes everything. And clearly we're living in a time like this, in a sense. Everything is based on interest and riba. There's a massive bubble on every level. If I go to buy from Costco, for example, clearly a lot of the stuff they've got there is probably based on some kind of weird credit, right? The way they run their system and everything like that. And then the people who they've bought from, the people they've borrowed from, right? The people who've invested for them, maybe Goldman Sachs or whatever. Do you understand? Right? Morgan Stanley, or whatever you want to say. At the end of the day, it's all there now. What are we going to do about that? And they think that everything else is that unjust hands have polluted it, and afsadatul muamalatul fasida, and haram dealings, corrupt dealings have polluted all of it. That's what they think about everything. وَلَيْسَ كَذَلِكَ. It's not like that, because the Prophet ﷺ said halal is clear, haram is clear. The Prophet ﷺ would have said no, everything is doubtful if halal was. So he says that the Prophet ﷺ saying al halalu bayyin means that there is halal still. And then he says وَإِنَّمَا الَّذِي فُقِدَ. What is lost though is not the halal, but what is lost though is al-ilmu bil-halali, is the knowledge of the halal. That's what's lost. And بِكَيْفِيَةِ الْوُصُولِ إِلَيْهِ, and how to get to it. And he does said, look, he says every one of these categories will remain. Halal will remain, haram will remain, and the mushtabahat, doubtful matters, will remain. However, what can happen is that the levels of them will fluctuate. So in certain cases where there's a lot of ignorance, the mushtabahat will increase. I've seen that with my own eyes. I've been to countries where there's less ulama, right? I don't want to take the name. There are less ulama there, and many matters are open to doubt. And everybody gives a different fatwa. In those countries, there's not even imams in the masjids. It's anybody that leads the prayer. And thus everybody makes their own decisions. And thus in that case, there's so much more doubtful matters. Whereas many of those doubtful matters should be in the category of halal or in the category of haram. But they're being differed over. We have some of that same kind of issue here. You know, simple issues of when the moon, when the Eid is supposed to be. Some of those simple issues. Sometimes it's made into a halal haram issue, right? And likewise the timings for the suhoor and so on and so forth. These are just some simple examples. Now clearly the point of the mushtabahat, as the Prophet ﷺ said, is that it's something that needs to be avoided because it's like a boundary. The doubtful matters, we're not sure what they are, but they're definitely a boundary to the haram. If you get too lax in your approach to these doubtful matters, oh, it's all alright, look, it's all alright. Is it fard, brother? Is it haram? No? Okay, khalas, it should be fine. There's some people who have that approach. They don't psychologically want in there, they want everything halal or haram. The mushtabahat, right? And you can't always have that access because you're not always going to have the knowledge to understand something. The reason for that is, let's just say there's a new financial deal. Are rebates halal or haram? Now somebody told you they're haram. Now do you know? You're going to have to go to a scholar. He's going to have to understand the system. He's going to then make a judgment. Now a number of scholars have looked at it. Or for example, you know this whole thing about ANC, what was it called? ANC? That investing thing? ACN. Is it ACN? ACN. ACN traffic monsoon. You know how much money has gone into that from Muslims? Because yesterday I had lunch with one of the what do you call the circle of stars of the ACN, right? He's one of the top 25 or something like this, right? And he's been for several years. You know how much money has gone into this, into traffic monsoon, which has just gone bust, right? It just was a big scam, right? How many Muslims got into this, right? And I remember in the beginning there was this whole doubt: is it halal or haram? Now that doesn't, you know, it could have been halal in terms of its in terms of the way it was set out, but that doesn't mean, that doesn't make it a good investment opportunity and not a deception, because something can be you know, based on some clear-cut rulings, but it doesn't have to be profitable. Do you understand? So don't confuse that matter together. So apparently ACN is very strong. It's moved into so many countries because it's very straightforward the way it works, whereas traffic monsoon was just a, you know, a gimmick right from the beginning. But the amount of Muslim money that's gone into that, now that was clearly a doubtful matter. Now the thing is that you see people in your masjid or people in your area, locality at work, they've made a lot of money in it initially. So you want to go into that, but you've heard some fatwas that you know, there's some problem about this. So you've heard some people saying, no, this could be wrong. That's a doubtful matter, right? Now you think, all these Muslims are doing it, I should just do it. Is your greed going to take over? How are you going to deal with this? See, that's what I want to try to approach, like the approach to these things. Now you might ask a mufti, is this allowed? And he'll say, I'll check it out for you, I'll check it out for you. And you ask him next week again, I'll check it out for you. You ask him the week after, I still need to check it out. It's taken 2 months and all your friends are making lots of money. I know, because if people have asked me this question, I just couldn't check it. You know, I just couldn't find out about it. Right? And that's your challenge now. Do you do it? You don't do it. I just met one man, a very wealthy man. He says that he's from a Shafi'i background. And he asked a certain scholar, and he couldn't find any good scholars in his area to tell him his zakat liability. His zakat liability. So somebody told him that, no, there's no zakat on you because of something, right? But his heart couldn't accept it. I'm making all of this money, how can there not be no zakat on me? On this particular fund or this particular aspect of my finance. So he says, although they were all telling me it's okay, now how would you approach that area? Your heart tells you should be paying zakat because I'm making some very clear money here. But the ulama of your area are telling you, maybe two alims told you, no, it's okay. Now those two alims are not proper muftis, but they just kind of gave you that ruling based on whatever they thought. Now how would you deal with that issue? Think about it. Would you do it? Would you pay zakat, or would you just say, no, they've told me, it's up to them now, it's a sin on them? How would you approach this? Some of us will say, they've told me, khalas, finish, I don't have to. I'm very comfortable with that idea. Some people will say, I'm going to take that. I have a doubt, but the sin is on them. Because there's a hadith to that effect, right? That there will come people, if somebody's asked and they give a response without knowledge, then the sin is on the one who gave the fatwa. So you think they're sinful. Now there's a third approach, which is that, look, I completely understand, but I've got money and my conscience does not allow me. I'm going to pay zakat. That's what this guy took. He said, I just couldn't agree with it. So then he asked me, I said, look, according to the Hanafis, it's very simple. You don't have to worry about when the money comes in. As long as at the beginning and end of the year you've got nisab, the minimum, and in between you don't go down to zero, then whatever comes in between, you ignore that. You just look on your anniversary date and you pay 2.5% of that as long as it's over there. And he says, yes, according to that, clearly you have to pay zakat. Right? Because in Shafi'is, they need an accountant to do their zakats. Right? Or you need a special spreadsheet or program, because every new nisab that comes in, like if the nisab is £300, every new nisab that comes in has its own year. So you have to keep track. So basically every month when you're getting paid, you probably have to keep track of that to see what happens with that nisab. That's so complicated. And in between, if you're a businessman, you're getting other types, it's complicated. Right? Hanafis, you just wait until the next year, and then you start realizing, okay, what is my assets on this day? And then you just pay according to that. He said, look, that's easy, that's what I'm going to do. Then he asked a few others, and they all told him, just go with the Hanafi opinion. It's easier and it's clear cut. Right? So again, what's going to be our approach when this is another doubtful matter. What I want for us is to just understand the various places where we can observe this hadith. Again, same thing. Gelatin. Right? The food, for food perspective, gelatin. Now, in South Africa, you've got a number of Jamiat ulamas, localized. So the Jamiat of Gauteng, which is Johannesburg and so on, they've said, according to their research, gelatin is haram. The ones from Natal, the other side, they said it's halal. These are both ulama from the same fraternity, but they did a different research. So now I've been approached with these two things. What am I supposed to do? Now I also have some other research from others. From Jordan, for example, they did a research and they discovered the same thing as the first group, which is, what it is that gelatin is made from the skin or the bones of animals, generally from pig or beef or whatever. If it's beef, gelatin is from that. Otherwise it could be from pork or otherwise. Now if it's from pig, it's going to be completely haram, right? Whether it's skin or bones. It's melted down, and you know the kind of sticky stuff, that's where you get the gelatin from. Now, when gelatin is finally produced after it's been boiled and really broken down to that degree, is gelatin the same thing as the original bone and the skin, or is it a different product completely? And it looks like a different product, right? It looks like, but when we're saying, does it become a different product? Is it like the pig fell into the salt mine and became so decomposed and so eaten up and so disintegrated that it actually became like salt? You can't tell the difference. That's halal. That becomes halal, by the way, right? That becomes halal, by the way. So is this gelatin procedure the same thing? So what you look at is you look at the compound, the chemical, the way it's made, the original, and you look at the gelatin and see the difference. What they discovered was that there wasn't sufficient adjustment and modification in the molecular compound and structure, even after it was broken down to such a degree. And thus they said it's the same thing. Like, is there enough of a molecular transformation that it becomes a new product, or is it the same product? Do you understand? So that's the way they look at it. At the end of the day, you got wheat, you crush it into flour, it's going to have the same compounds. Has this one undergone more transformation or not? So according to these guys, it doesn't do enough of a transformation. So it's a doubtful issue. Now in this doubtful issue, let's imagine that many things, even staple things, had to contain gelatin. Then maybe in that case we may go by the lenient fatwa, because it's difficult to avoid. There's umumul balwa. I mean, I know this is becoming more of a fiqh class, but I think it's important to understand this fiqh of things, that because it's related to the doubt aspect, which is related to the nafs, right? So for me personally, I avoid it. However, because there is this fatwa that it is jaiz, I would say that if it's, and in my personal opinion, if you have something with gelatin, you can give it to a non-Muslim neighbor or something. Because haram you can't give to non-Muslims either. You can't even give to animals. Haram, because it's haram, you know. Because you shouldn't be giving haram to somebody. But if it's gelatin, then because there's that, rather than waste it, then you give it to, because of that. That's the way you combine between these things. And the Prophet ﷺ did the same thing. He legislated that this particular person was the child of Zam'a, but he told Sauda radiallahu anha, a long story, but he told Sauda radiallahu anha, so Zam'a, who was her father, had a woman, like a slave girl, and they called them a walida. And this is the Jahiliyyah times. They had a walida. And what they would do is they would prostitute them out. It was quite normal for even the it was not considered dishonorable in a sense. Even the honorable, the sayyids of the Quraysh, etc., would come and if they wanted, they could claim that child. That's what it was. If there was a child, they would claim that child if they wanted to. Otherwise, they wouldn't claim it. So that's what you call wala'id, walida, right? So now what happened is one person had gone and done this. So before he died, he told his brother, I think it was Sa'd radiallahu an, that when you get to Makkah, because they were in Makkah, when you get to Makkah, then claim that child because he's my child. Do you understand? But that child was born to that woman who was in the wedlock of Zam'a. So now he comes and claims the child, but Zam'a's other son says, no, this is my father's child, because he was born in his to his walida, whatever it is. He came to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ said, al-waladu lil firash. The child is always going to be for the one in whose marriage this is worked, unless they want to disown the child. And then you have to do mula'ana, and there's lots of long story there, right? Walil ahiri al hajar. And for the one who committed the zina, right, he should be stoned. Do you understand? So now that means he is Sauda's half brother, because Sauda radiallahu anha, the Prophet's wife, is from that same family, right? So now she should be able to meet him and everything like that. But the Prophet said, no, ihtajibi minhu. You must do hijab from him. Although technically he's your brother, but I see the resemblance with this side. So although we've legislated according to the technical aspect here, but the reality seems different. So you must observe that. So this tells us that in Sharia, you can have this double kind of role, in the sense that technically you legislate something, but you don't practically follow it in that sense. Do you understand? Because somebody say, no, that's too complicated, it should be straightforward. Well, look, this wasn't very straightforward. One is what you say for the system. The other one is what you say for precaution. So there's a concept of precaution in our deen. That's where all of this comes from. So now for us, we have to keep our hearts open and always be looking to improve. This is basically the perspective. If a person is looking to get better and get closer to Allah, reform their character, become more refined in their understanding, then we must learn more. We must keep our hearts open. We must never feel that it's finished now, this is my status quo, this is how I am going to be, this is going to be my approach. Once we've done that, we will never enhance, we will never improve ourselves. But if we're always looking to improve and get closer and become better, then that, and what helps in that is obviously doing dhikr of Allah, because that softens the heart. Hard-heartedness is the problem. Hard-heartedness is the problem where it becomes fixated on something. That's why keep the heart open with the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we will see inshallah the benefits that come from that. So that's how this comes into it. Hopefully this Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to make good of this, and to remove and abstain from as many doubtful matters as possible in our lives. Allahumma anta as-salam wa minka as-salam, tabarakta ya dhal jalali wal ikram. Allahumma ya hayyu ya qayyum bi rahmatika nastaghith. اللهم يا حنان يا منان لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إنا كنا من الظالمين يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم اغفر لنا وارحمنا وعافنا واهدنا وارزقنا. Oh Allah, accept our du'as. Oh Allah, accept our du'as. Oh Allah, accept our gathering here. Oh Allah, accept our gathering. Oh Allah, we ask you for forgiveness. Oh Allah, we ask you for forgiveness and purity in our lives. Oh Allah, we ask you for divine insight. Oh Allah, we ask you for insight into these matters. Oh Allah, we ask you for restraint. Oh Allah, we ask you for restraint. We ask you for assistance. We ask you for clemency. Oh Allah, we ask you for clemency. We ask you for your compassion. Oh Allah, we ask that you inspire our hearts, you fill them with your love, Oh Allah, fill them with understanding and distinction. Oh Allah, we have become stagnant. Oh Allah, we have become stagnant. Oh Allah, we are not progressing. Oh Allah, grant us the ability to progress and become better and to enhance ourselves. Oh Allah, we ask that you grant us an ability to understand the difference between what is halal and what is haram. To understand the difference between what is halal and what is haram. Oh Allah, grant us that understanding. Oh Allah, we ask you for blessing in our life. We ask you for blessing in our life. Oh Allah, we ask you to protect us and our children, for us to be the best role models for our children, to give the best tarbiyah for our children. Oh Allah, we ask to keep our protection in our homes. Oh Allah, protections of all of our assets, and oh Allah, especially the asset of our iman. Oh Allah, we ask you for guidance. Oh Allah, we ask you for taqwa. Oh Allah, we ask you for the best deeds and the best actions. Oh Allah, we ask you for a heart that is conducive to your worship. Oh Allah, we ask that you make our hearts, your obedience beloved in our hearts, your disobedience hated in our hearts. Oh Allah, grant us a divine understanding, divine insight into the matters that surround us and that challenge us. Oh Allah, day by day there are more matters that challenge us. We ask you for true understanding in them. We ask that you make us closer to you as every day goes by, as every year goes by, so that when we are on our deathbed, we are the closest to you. Oh Allah, we ask you to grant us the kalima on our deathbed. Oh Allah, we ask that you make the best meeting that we've ever experienced, the meeting that we've had, that we're going to have with you. Oh Allah, the day that we meet you, that you love to see us and we love to see you. Oh Allah, we ask you for true blessing. We ask you for true blessing. Oh Allah, accept our du'as. Oh Allah, accept our du'as. Oh Allah, accept this gathering of ours. Oh Allah, despite all of our shortcomings, oh Allah, we ask you to reward us. We ask you to keep us on the straight path and infuse our hearts with your love and the love of those who love you. Oh Allah, accept our du'as. Oh Allah, accept our du'as. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifuna wa salamun ala al-mursaleen walhamdulillahi.